Hey, welcome to the Little Better Podcast. My name is Daniel, and I'll be your host. Today on the podcast, we talk all about the resurrection of Jesus. Did it really happen, and can we believe it? And if we can, we should go all in on it. We're so excited that you're here this week. Remember, our goal on the podcast is to know Jesus better, and by the power of His Spirit, do better, so together we can be a little better. Hey, welcome to the Little Better Podcast. This is the one about Easter, right? But we would normally spend the first 25 minutes, or just kidding, but 7 minutes talking about how amazing Easter was this weekend. It was incredible, but we don't know yet because we're actually filming this before Easter in light of the anticipation and the faith of how great Easter
we walk by faith
is going to be.
It will be amazing.
It's going to be good. But we have just sat through and listened to your message. If those of you who don't know, we put a lot of work and energy and effort, and people that hear and see, put their eyes on every sermon that goes out at Northridge. We do a process called pre-preach, and we just had that. Yeah. We just heard it. And so, Drew, what is your sermon in 60?
Well, it's Easter, so it's central to basically Jesus being alive. But really, we look at the evidence to the truth of the Easter morning, right? And so we don't have to believe a fairy tale or not believe something, because there is evidence that gives us confidence that Jesus is alive. And so we talk about reality checks in life and how we all have them, but the greatest reality check is the resurrection true or not? And so we explore some of the evidence that gives us confidence that we can stand true and fast to Jesus is alive, and that can change our life and will change our life if we allow it to.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm just going to go ahead and apologize in advance, because every time I hear Easters, all I hear is Nacho Libre. The Easters. Easters. Yeah, the guy who has a nasally voice on Nacho Libre. That's one of my favorite movies. So that's I'll digress. So you open the message and you talk about at one point, and just a snippet, you go through this quick list of all the things that our faith could be resting on and why it needs to rest in the person, the work, the finished work of Christ on the cross and His ultimately the resurrection. That's where the foundation of all of our faith needs to be for all believers. But you talk about good works, family faith, and the faith and spiritual disciplines. Why are those things, let's start here. Why are those things faulty to not be the ultimate foundation for our life and our pursuit of Christ?
Yeah, I think the answer is simple. They can't conquer sin, right? So all those things are good things, right? Mm-hmm. Being a good person, I would encourage everybody to be a good person and treat people well. And I would encourage people who have, family who has faith to lean on that faith, but it not be the backbone of your faith. And, religious activities, as long as you're doing them with the right heart, reading your Bible, those are all good things. Mm-hmm. But they don't have the power to overcome sin. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That is the bottom line. Yeah. Only Jesus can overcome our sin. That's the centrality of the gospel, is we were broken, we couldn't be fixed, and all of our good deeds combined, you take all of those things I listed, combine them together, they still aren't enough. Jesus is.
Yeah, and I think that makes the importance of gospel clarity that we need to, recover. If you look at the past 10 to 20 years in, the church, there's been a lot of conversation about what is the gospel clarity, and there's this easy drifting away from gospel clarity to talk about these other things more and make those things the gospel when they're not the gospel. They're byproducts of the gospel, because of what Jesus has done and has freed us from our captivity to sin, we can then do good works. As James says, faith is not opposed to good works, but we do good works because of our faith, not for our faith. And so, and then you talk about family or sharing the gospel. We don't anchor it in relationships. We have gospel-centered relationships because of the gospel. They're all byproducts, not the actual thing. Gospel. And there's a important distinction to make there, because it could easily, and so many people do, easily make things that are byproducts of the gospel and say, this is the thing, but it's not the thing. It's the thing that comes after the thing. And so
I just love the 7-week Final Word series where it was just cross for 7 weeks, that is where our salvation was accomplished. But then the proof of it and the power of the resurrection, the empty tomb is mission accomplished, battle won. But that's the anchor, that's the focus. Yep.
Yeah, I love that. And then you're making this case and argument of why the resurrection is believable or real, and you come to a place where you point out multiple places in Scripture where people doubted, right? You talk about one of my, I don't know if it's underrated, but one of the most mind-boggling things is that Matthew 28, like 11 through 15 passage, where it's like Matthew tells you how the Jewish leaders sow seeds of doubt. They're like, all right, this is the story that we're all sticking with, guys. Right. And
sounds like our politics today.
Yeah,
I read that and I was like, oh my goodness, that just looks like government today. Like, oh, here's some money. I'll do whatever you want.
What do you need me to say?
People in power closing ranks? When does that ever happen?
Yeah, and it's just like, all right, guys, listen, you're going to say this and you're going to say this. Make sure we're all sticking on the same page. Let's rehearse
and
this
it was
again.
the cover of their hide, right?
Yeah.
Really, the guards were like, oh no, we lost Jesus.
Right.
And the chief priests, everybody's just covering their own hide. It's amazing to me. I love that Matthew 28. I love both parts of it too.
Yeah.
Right. I love the story of doubt, where doubt came from. Like, I think that is not talked about enough on Easter, right? Like, hey, look what happened. This is why there is so much controversy around the gospel. This is why we have to have this reality check, because from the very beginning, people lied, right? People covered up the truth, and that.
Well, why did they lie? They lied because the truth threatened their position.
That's right.
Right? And really, it's the same for each of us, right?
Yeah.
To accept the gospel threatens our own self-salvation, our own trust and whatever, our own yielding of authority to someone else. So
you said that in pre-preach too. I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
It did threaten them. Like, they were going to be in, big doo-doo.
Right.
If the truth came out. So I know. Sorry. I have 4 kids.
We take it up a notch.
We talk about doo-doo and poo-poo a lot.
You don't get that Sunday morning. You got to come to the podcast.
I also think what's crazy about Matthew 28 is as Jesus comes back, his disciples see him and still some doubt. That's the power of, I think, our enemy that he has over our minds and what we think is just, man, people were looking at Jesus. He was dead and he's alive, and they're like, some still
But I have to rewrite my understanding of the world. Rewrite my understanding of the world to believe what's right in front of my eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like and that's the thing when you were talking about in the evidence, right? Is the evidence for the Bible is far stronger than other ancient literature. The only reason it's weaker is because, that's just not an allowed possibility. We just don't permit the supernatural. Therefore, it's not true.
There's a great book out on Frank Turek. He wrote, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist.
Yes.
And the whole book is all, it's not even just around the Easter, it's around like just faith in general. His whole point is it takes more faith to actually not believe in God than it does to believe in God.
Right. We all have to take a step of faith, right? Because there's all gaps to fill, things we can't see. But we believe that faith in the resurrection is the position of least faith, right? And that's where it comes to me, because I do get shaken at time. You hang around with smart people with all kinds of doubts and stuff, and it rocks your world a little bit. And you just take a deep breath, and then you look at things again. It's like, you know what? I just can't explain history unless the resurrection didn't happen.
And let's make a connection, right? Okay, go to Matthew 28, right? The religious leaders cover up the truth of the resurrection. We see the same thing in modern day as we look at the Bible, right? What do scholars do? We even read it in that quote, right? They use a different standard.
Right.
They use a different guide because they don't want the Bible to be accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
So they, because it comes back to that accountability. If this is true, wow. I have a spiritual authority now. I have a God who is alive, who should have some say in my life, even though I want all the say in my life.
Yeah, because I've heard it said, and I'll probably butcher the way that it was originally said, but if Jesus really did raise back from the dead, which we're saying he did, then his words aren't just like clever sayings, but those words actually have life-giving power. And some of those things that he said are hard
Yeah.
to swallow.
Right.
And so that's just
Well, and all
Yeah.
the religious leaders who were like, "This guy's a nut job," they would have to go back.
Yeah.
And not only would they have to go back on what they said, but they would lose power.
Have you ever seen people struggle with reversing their position? Locking in on something?
yeah, for real, for real.
We could go through a laundry list of
Yeah.
all the
Throughout
things we
generations.
see. Yeah, throughout
Yeah,
generations.
for real.
Just ask my
and
wife.
Supercharged in the last, supercharged in the last 2 years, right? You take a position and you
Ooh.
just dig in, right?
You
Yeah.
went there, didn't you?
Yeah,
boy.
well, we're talking a lot about doubt, and so Drew, one of the action steps you tell us to do is to wrestle with our doubt, wrestle it down. What are some ways to give us healthy guardrails in our wrestling with our doubt? Because I think there are some pastors, church leaders who just say, "Oh, that's okay. It's okay to doubt. It's good to doubt. It's it's all these things." But then you have people who've been in faith or raised in church, and then they're told that, and then that wrestling leads them to, you throughout the deconstruction. You talked about that last week. You had kind of a comment on that during your sermon, and it leads us in a almost a wrong direction. So, what are the helpful guardrails in doubt that we see that people did doubt in Scripture, and those came around? We have doubting Thomas as an example that you use, and I think it's crazy that he gets pinned with that joking name because he becomes like one of the first missionaries to the country of India, and like he does all these amazing things, and but he's still pinned as that one moment. That one moment, he's doubting Thomas, and that's what everybody knows him by.
So unfair.
And so it's like this one moment in his life, and then he goes to share the gospel and lives the rest of his life, gets martyred for Christ, but he's doubting Thomas.
Well,
But
never lives that down.
never lives that one moment down. And so, what are some healthy guardrails in doubt? And I looked up doubt because I think it's helpful to define our terms, and that's to wrestle with or have unbelief or questioning in something. It's to question something. That's what to doubt means.
Yeah, so I think in our society today, even in the midst of a lot of questions we often run to the same source for everything, right? And what happens is it builds echo chambers, and we never see both sides, right? So I would challenge people to take a good hard look at both sides, right? I do believe that the power of the gospel and the truth of the gospel will, if you truly give it a fair chance, will always win. I believe that. I do. I believe one of the greatest promises God says is, if you draw near to me, I'll draw near to you. So I do believe if you are trying to find the truth about God, he will reveal it to you through many ways. I would say be careful who you ask questions to. Find yourself people who are educated, who understand, who can answer some of the questions you have. And so I would also challenge you to find a safe place. There are people who will try to talk you into a lot of things. Yeah. So find trustworthy people that you can surround yourself with to ask the questions that you do have.
Yeah. And if I jump in really fast here, and I think our motive goes a lot into this, that we can't see that, but if you have doubts, just to throw, one scripture reference that came to my mind was in James chapter 1. It says, the person who lacks wisdom, let him ask God in faith and to not doubt, And so that's what it says. The command is to not doubt. But even if you just use the principle of that first verse, is like the intention in us seeking God is to seek God with a pure heart, or, hey, I really want to know. I really want to find the truth. And Brad, you're bringing up some comments in even pre-preach and even in this conversation right now of are we trying to discover things or dig into our doubts because we don't want it to be true?
Right.
Because if we don't want it to be true, just like you said, Drew, we'll figure out
we'll find someone who will say
here's
that.
the logic.
Right.
I want this. I want it to be this, and we'll find somebody who affirms that. Yep. And we have to cast aside all of our presuppositions, all those things, and say, I want to know the truth, and I want to follow the truth.
Right.
That has to be our intention in our digging.
Yeah, the Bible acknowledges that so much, right? Jeremiah, the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked, above all things, who can know it? How can we know even our own selves? We will deceive ourselves, talk our things. Yeah, and so it just to approach that with humility is just like, what biases am I bringing? There's a lot of work recently on all kinds of cognitive biases, right?
Yeah.
Ways we trap ourselves,
Yeah.
into thinking the wrong things. It's just we are very good, again, at protecting our own turf, protecting our own position. Here's come stuff that threatens us, and we
Because we'll read those passages in the
it.
Bible. I'm like, I don't want this to be true. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm just being honest. Like,
Well, and you find people all throughout generations who don't want to believe something, so they go somewhere else
Right.
to affirm what they believe.
Yeah. And so that's where it becomes difficult.
Yeah, and we're talking about doubt. So there's that term, healthy skepticism, right? Which certainly implies there's an unhealthy skepticism.
Yes,
And I do think we live in a culture that's exceedingly skeptical. And there was an essay written years ago by Jedediah Purdy on irony. I just love this, but it just talked about this whole attitude that no one wants to be considered a sucker. Right? It's just like, I'm not that naive. I'm not. So we don't believe anything, right?
Yeah.
And they talk about irony, and they talk about, actually, I think about Seinfeld, It's just like they have that whole mantra of no hugging, no learning, right? It's just like nothing. We're not believing anything. We're not changing anything. It's just leave me alone. But it's just to believe anything makes you look foolish and naive. We have a culture that's very, very
and
biased
Christianity
against that.
can often be considered that, right? For
Right.
people who are skeptics, right?
Sure.
You're naive. But again, I think that's why we have to come back to evidence, right? I think that again, you look at Homer's Iliad, right? Everybody believes the validity of that, and the actual manuscripts are tiny compared to the Bible. And again, I think as someone
and
who's
you talked about Iliad. Iliad is the one who has the most.
I know.
And so every other one that we prove in history has less than the
that,
Iliad,
yes.
and we
the
count
Iliad
those
is
as
the prime example of this is
it has the
Bible
most.
pales.
There's lots of other literature we have no doubts about.
Yeah.
And I think on the topic of doubt, I do think we have to get to the point in our faith where we are okay with some doubt, right? Because it's like you said, there are certain things you don't want to doubt about, right? Like, is Jesus alive? Did he die on the cross? But there are aspects of God. The Bible says his ways are higher than ours. And so you won't understand everything.
Sure.
You will have doubts. And so learning the fine line of what is okay to have doubts or questions on, and what are things do I need to firm up my beliefs on?
even would you say doubt, or would you just say, like, those are just the mysteries of God and we just don't know? And because I think there's a difference, right?
Sure.
There's a difference in saying, like, in my human brain and capacity, I don't know if I'll ever be able to understand this thing versus having a doubt in something
that's a
where
good
I
point.
lack faith in God about this thing. Because in Deuteronomy, there's that passage, I think it's like 29:18 or something like that. It's like there are things that are revealed and things that are hidden of God. And so where he has chosen in his sovereignty and in his wisdom to say, you're not going to get to know this one. And so,
like we do as parents with our kids, right?
Right, yeah.
We shield them from certain things
Yeah.
to protect them. God does the same thing with us.
yeah, absolutely.
So I think you're right. Doubt is a bad word. It's more of a mystery, right? You just don't know.
Yeah. And so here's the question about those things that we should solid up. When's the time to move past our doubt or move on from it, if that's even the right way to say that? I don't really know how to frame that question well. Is like, is there ever a time to say for that person who is, I have some doubts, I need to do some digging, and okay, they've dug. All right, when's the time where it says, I'm crossing the line, I'm not doubting this anymore, and when I go back, I'm living in another camp? Or do we constantly just live in this wrestling of like, well, maybe not, and we just go week by week figuring out which camp we're in?
So this is such a good question, and I'm totally winging it in my response. Okay. But it's just like, I'm just thinking out loud. It's just like, okay, here's this doubt. Well, your position of doubt is faith in something else, right? What is it that you're?
That's a good point.
What
Brad.
are you really, resting in? What do you really, and what's the evidence for that, right? What's the evidence? I mean, are you doubting? Are you doubting stuff that is less worthy of doubt, than the other things you're allowing to possibly be true?
Bro, teach me to wing it like that.
Come on.
Great response.
That was phenomenal.
And I think, yes, there is a time, right, to cross that line. We say that term, and what we mean is to transfer what Brad said, your trust in something else, into God.
Right.
Right, into his work and his resurrection. And, if you're considering that, I would say the time is now, right? Why wait? And I get like people have to have all the answers, but it's like you said, there are some mysteries. This is a leap of faith.
There will always be faith, right?
Yes.
If you're waiting for there to be, there's no such thing as no faith.
That's right.
Yeah.
But again, it's the faith that we cross with the most evidence, right? And I also think about the fact that we know all kinds of other ways to be assured of the resurrection. I mean, it could be emotional experiences, right? I mean, there will be people who will step into an environment that surprises them, overwhelms them emotionally. The band is doing a great job, and they just feel so moved, you know, and it's just like, this must be true, right? And you feel that so strongly. But then what basis is that, right? I mean, you might be at a U2 concert and be just as moved later, right?
Yeah.
But that's not, I mean, those things are consistent with, right? The evidence. We have this evidence. We know it's true, and therefore it's not surprising that there's an emotional response. I mean, it's an amazing story, right? This love story. I mean,
it will move you.
Who is this God who gives his son? I would never sacrifice my child. You know, even if my adult child said, "I'll do it, Dad." No, you're not doing it. No way are you doing it. You know, but just, you know, but this desperate act of love, you know, to rescue us. So the emotions are entirely appropriate, but they're not the basis for why we believe it's true. It's not just a great story.
That's why I like this message too, because I feel like it's a perfect balance of, you're going to be moved by a God who stepped in your place. Wait, we've been looking at the cross for 7 weeks, right? Like, that's got to move you emotionally. Like, wow.
Right.
But then this is balanced with, like, it's not just, wow, we're emotional people who are like, wow, this is so good, I'm going to follow it. No, there is the evidence. And when your emotions and the evidence click together, that's a powerful thing. And at the end of the day, that crossing the line of faith, I think it's important to say, it's a God thing, right? It is God. I loved what you said at W3, like taking the blinders off, right? Until God takes the blinders off your eyes, I don't think you can cross that line of faith. And so there's this beautiful work. It's all God, and we don't know the full spectrum, but all God and our response to God's work. And we don't know how that works perfectly. Scholars debate this nonstop, but God's got to remove those blinders.
It's a real response on our part, a genuine act, you know, of will and belief, but the author of that, which we just is God.
That's good. And I want to challenge, you know, the people who are listening. You guys have been talking about these emotions and this evidence, or this, you know, we'll say knowledge, motions and a knowledge, and God made both those things, and both those things happen in the cross, in the whole Bible. The whole Bible is constantly this. It's filled with emotions. It's packed with emotions, but it's intelligible literature. It's logical. It's logical literature, and it's historical literature. And you know, there's people who usually self-select, or just based on their wiring, they land in one of those camps or the other. And I think one of the most healthy things we can do is live in that middle ground. Like that, we need to. There are people who are more emotional driven, that what they want is, I want another moving worship service and just a passionate sermon.
I love them.
And I love them. And I love those things, right? But like the challenge for a lot of those is like, hey, you should probably like
know something.
You know, surprised to like dig into some evidence. You know, like my only rebuttal can't be, you know, the Gaither song, "I know he lives because he lives within my heart." Like, you know, like we need, you know, if we're going to win our neighbors and our loved ones who aren't just like, hey, he's in my heart, you know, but with statistics show that that's enough evidence for most people is they want a personal encounter, that personal experience. That's enough, settles it. But for those people who live kind of in the emotional camp, we need to challenge, grow in your knowledge. So,
and the Bible says we should be ready to give an answer.
What
I also love about this message too is I feel like I'm like propping up my own message.
It's such a good job.
Is that okay?
No.
This was such a
Well,
but like,
you got out of the way and let God do some good stuff.
that's right, exactly. He's got to do that. But how many Christians today, if they were asked, why do you believe the resurrection, would have evidence to prove why they believe it? Like, this is also this apologetic of like, I need to be ready when someone challenges my faith to stand on the evidence of my faith.
And we'll link in the show notes of this. There's a short, like 20-minute lecture that I found by William Lane Craig, great apologist, and he gives 4 proofs for the resurrection that he cites in a short little lecture at a church. I'm like, hey, if that's you, jump in this. And he gives some great points. One of his first one is I'll just give you a spoiler is the people of the Bible. One of the biggest arguments is, well, Jesus never really existed, and it's like.
I know people who say that.
Paul is not an idiot. Like he was a Judaizer. He would not have said, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna change over to another camp to this guy who is a fairy tale." Like he he lived about 3 years.
Scholar.
He's in the same time frame. Paul's a scholar. He would not have landed in the camp that Jesus did not existed, and he radically changed his position in his life. And so that's great evidence. But we'll leave that
for it.
Yeah, he died for it. And so, all right, what about the other camp though? Those who land in the intellectual camp. My challenge for them would be like, we need to sit in the reality of not picking up another book. And you're crazy to hear me say that, right? And so don't pick up another book, but like
he's feverish, people. He's feverish.
Oh man, I'm just kidding.
Rena will hear this podcast.
Right. So don't pick up another book, but during this Easter season, this Easter week after Easter, just sit in the fact of what God did for us,
moved by it.
and get moved by it. Like get some fire in your bones, about the fact of like, wow, like God, displayed his glory, displayed his love. Like this is incredible, and maybe shed a tear over it,
Absolutely. Yeah, right. I think Tim Keller talks about light and heat,
Yeah.
that light, where on the scriptures where we sort of understand it. But there's times when the heat comes.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it'll blow us away if we let it, right? It just comes in and, and that is some of the beauty of art, right? There's people who either just write beautifully, like gentle and lowly, right?
Yeah.
It's this beautiful walk into the love and compassion of Christ, or someone who just a worship band. That's where it comes. Is they're bringing to you what you already knew, but just to see it, say it in a different way, and just it can rock you.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, wow, that was incredible. All right, so Drew, as we wrap up, where are we headed after this? It's after Easter. We're probably going to take it slow. We're going to take it, we're probably going to do this fluffy series, right? Is that we're coming next?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to talk about the end of the world. Like, no joke either.
Yeah.
So we're jumping into the book of Revelation. I say this is every church.
Short series, 2 weeks, right?
I wish. It's going to be, honestly, for Revelation, it's going to be a short series. It's 9 weeks. And I always say it's every church member's dream and every pastor's nightmare. So, no, we've been working hard. We've been researching and writing, and we're getting ready to button up the series, and so it's almost finished. But I am really excited about our church getting a better understanding of Revelation. It's not again, if you know the book of Revelation, 9 weeks is not going to be a deep dive, but we're going to give handles to people to understand the events and a little bit of the timeline of Revelation. And so I'm excited for it. Yeah. I'm nervous for it. So it should be great.
Yeah, I love it. And so this is a good series too. We're testing putting together just a single page PDF resource page. And so, and if you aren't a normal listener to this podcast, or if you know some people who aren't normal listeners, this will be similar to the Heaven series where we are going to take some questions.
Unfortunately,
we are going to do some deep dive on the podcast. That
Brad is researching all your questions.
Brad's doing all the research. And so
I will wing it.
And so we're going to do questions every week tied to this series. We can help. We are going to cover some larger chunks in Revelation. Some of the weeks will be just over a handful of verses. Some of the weeks will be over a handful of chapters. But we're trying to, the goal, as you'll say and we'll outline, is to give people handles so that they can dive into the book themselves. But you'll still have questions. We still want to acknowledge and help with.
You will have questions.
Yeah, you'll have some questions, and there'll be a few books that we recommend, but I'll try to give descriptions on that one single resource page of like, read this one if you're looking for this.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, what we recommend is, take this week. There's a reading plan that we're doing on that resources page, so you can read through the book of Revelation slowly and get ready for that sermon that you'll probably, write a bunch of questions out, as you're reading. Maybe that would be helpful. Submit those, and it'll be a full compassing, all hands on deck for this one. Sermon on Sunday, podcasts, book, you're going to need all of it. So
it's going to be fun, though.
It's going to be good. Well, hey, thanks so much for listening this week on A Little Better. We trust that you had a wonderful Easter week, and we can't wait to dive into Revelation, the Revelation, next week. See you then.